Conklin, who's an American biologist and zoologist, once said that the probability of life originating from accident is comparable to the probability of the unabridged dictionary resulting from an explosion in a printing shop. And so tonight, we're going to look at Genesis chapter 1, and I really want to try to answer three questions. Here's the first one I want to answer. Why does it matter what you believe about creation in your outline? Number two, how did God create the universe? And number three, what exactly did God do during that first week of history? So let's begin with question one. Why does it matter what you believe about creation? Well, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 states, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." In his book, The Battle for the Beginning, by Dr. John MacArthur, which I highly recommend all of you read, he writes this: "Either there is a God who created the universe and sovereignly rules his creation, or everything was caused by blind chance. The two ideas are mutually exclusive. If God rules, then there's no room for chance. But make chance the cause of the universe, and you have effectively done away with God." So that's why it matters what you believe. As I've said before, if you can believe the first verse in the Bible, then you won't have any problem believing the rest of the Bible. The words of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 essentially account for everything that has been made, the universe and all of creation. Henry Morris writes, "Genesis 1:1 is unique in all literature, science, and philosophy. Only the book of Genesis even attempts to account for the ultimate origin of matter, space, and time. And it does so uniquely in terms of special creation." I'm going to give you some things in the outline, so just follow along with me. I want you to understand that in this very first verse, we're all faced with a choice. Either we believe that God created the heavens and the earth, or he did not. And here's why it matters what you believe. If God did not create all that we can see, then he does not exist at all, and nothing has any meaning or purpose. We are just higher forms of animals in the evolutionary stages of development, and we're left to survive as best we can. And so it literally is survival of the fittest, if that's what you believe. However, if God is behind creation, then that alone gives meaning to life, and it also means that there's a purpose for our existence. And man, there's one thing I want you to understand that we're going to really delve into this week, and particularly next week. God created each one of you with a purpose. You're not an accident. He created you with a purpose. Douglas Kelly, who's professor of systematic theology at Reformed Theological Seminary, writes, "Essentially, mankind has only two choices. Either we have evolved out of the slime and can be explained only in a materialistic sense, meaning that we're all made of nothing but the material, or we have been made on a heavenly pattern." I'm going to actually show you next week that we've actually been made by the material, but God took that material and he made it based on a heavenly pattern. And so, man, what you believe about creation matters, because out of your belief concerning creation, that will give way to the starting point for your entire worldview. In other words, what you believe about creation will affect everything that you believe about life. Francis Schaeffer, I don't know if y'all remember him, he died in 1984, but he was a brilliant theological Christian scholar. He was a Presbyterian, and he once said, just talking to show the importance of creation in his mind. He said, "If I only had an hour to spend with an unbeliever, I would spend the first 55 minutes talking about creation, what it means for humanity to actually bear the image of God. And then he said, I would spend the last 5 minutes explaining the way of salvation." That's how important creation is. Do you want to know why you're here? Do you want to know what your purpose in life is? Do you want to know where you're headed when you die? Then you need to understand that what you believe about creation actually affects the answers to those three questions. That's why it's so important what you believe about creation. Number two, how did God create the universe? Well, the answer is really very simple. He created the universe by divine fiat, that is, by divine decree. God instantaneously spoke creation into existence. When he said, "Let it be," guess what? It was. You see, evolution teaches the exact opposite. Evolution requires a process that literally spans billions of years and is still not finished. According to evolution, everything is still evolving. And evolution teaches that everything is moving from chaos to order if you take a reasonable look at the world, you see that it's actually going from order to chaos. It's going from order to disorder. That's the second law of thermodynamics, that everything is breaking down. I mean, you can just walk through a forest and see that everything is breaking down. There's rot and there's decay. We're not becoming more organized. We're becoming more chaotic. Just watch the news. The scientific method requires observation. But who, may I ask, was present when God created the world? Psalm 33 verse 6 states, "By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, their starry hosts by the breath of his mouth." And so David, who wrote most of the Psalms and who was a very intelligent man, he believed that God spoke creation into existence. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 3 says, "By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible." The Latin phrase, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I'll give it you the Bethel pronunciation. Creatio ex nihilo. How's that? Creatio ex nihilo. It means to create out of nothing. And see, that's what Orthodox Christianity puts forth, is that God created everything out of nothing. And he accomplished this by his spoken word. When he spoke, creation came into existence. And I want you to understand that, listen, when God created the world, he created it mature. It had the appearance of age. For example, consider Adam. When Adam was created, he was not created as an infant or as an embryo. He was created as a fully grown, mature man. And so if a scientist traveled back in time and used his carbon dating techniques on Adam, he would be mistaken if he said that he was, years old when he was just a few moments old. Think about the New Testament. When Jesus turned water into wine. You remember that in John chapter 2? It instantaneously, the host said, "This is the best wine I've ever tasted." Who brings out the best wine at the end? So he implied that it was aged wine, that it was mature wine. Dr. John MacArthur writes, "When we're dealing with things created ex nihilo, out of nothing, evidences of maturity or signs of age do not constitute proof of antiquity." How about when Jesus turned the loaves of bread and the fish into food? He turned them into what? Bread and freshly cooked fish. And so it had age, even though it was just a few moments, created. How old is the earth? I don't really know. Nobody knows. But I personally believe, this is just for me, that it's less than 10,000 years old. I believe it's 6,000 or 7,000 years old. But listen, that's not a hill for me on which to die. If I get to heaven and the Lord tells me, "Russ, you were way off on that. It was 1 billion years old," I'm not going to say, "Gosh, I want to go back and start all over." I'm going to be just excited to be in heaven. One of my favorite professors what's so funny about that? One of my favorite professors at Southeastern, Dr. John Selhammer, he believed in an old earth. And so he had to kind of, in my opinion, and I love Dr. Selhammer. Tommy knows him. Great man. Brilliant man. But he had a little bit different interpretation of Genesis chapter 1. And who am I to argue with him? But you see, I just believe that I believe that if you believe that the earth is billions of years old, I believe that directly goes against what the Bible teaches. So I just believe the earth is younger than that. But here's the bottom line. Because, it doesn't really matter about the age of the earth. It's just something for people to argue about so that they don't have to believe. They're looking for a reason why not to believe the Bible. That's why when Darwin's theory of evolution was presented to the world leapt upon it. Do you know why? Because they wanted something so they wouldn't have to believe the Bible. They wouldn't have to believe that there's a God who's going to stand in judgment of them one day. That's really the bottom line. In Genesis chapters 1 and 2, it's basically teaching us one thing in your outline. It's showing us that God's creative power exists, and it's beyond human understanding. And I personally believe that the evidence that's been uncovered by both science and archaeology support the biblical account of special creation. But listen, you must decide what you believe. Either you believe the account of creation as presented by man, or you believe the account of creation presented by God. The choice is yours. Question number 3. What exactly did God do during that first week of history? And I want to try to look at this 1 or 2 days at a time. really need 7 weeks so that we could spend 1 week on each day. But I'm going to try to cover tonight. I'm really just going to cover 6 days. Unfortunately, I can't get to the 7th day, but we all know what he did on the 7th day. But look at day 1. Look at verses 2 through 5. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. In your outline, in the first moments of creation, the earth was uninhabited and without form. But all the essential elements were present that are necessary for life. It's like God was the potter, and he was in his workshop, and he just took a lump of clay, and he set it on its axis at 23 degrees. And he began to form and make this lump of clay into a perfect world for us to exist in. And so God began with raw material by creating this mass of elements, and he carefully shaped and formed it into the perfect environment for what would be the pinnacle of his creative work, which is you and me, mankind. It all began in total darkness. And into that darkness, God called forth light. Now, I want y'all to picture this. During the first hours of creation, the earth literally began to spin on its axis as God, again, who is the potter, was shaping it, this forming this mass into a beautiful world for us to exist in. The light shone upon the earth, even though at this point the sun and the moon and the stars had not yet been created. So the question is, where did that light come from? It came from God. You know, when we get to heaven, Revelation says there will be no sun. That we won't need the sun because we'll have the light of God's glory. And so somehow, during those first couple of days, God provided light, even though he had not yet created the sun or the moon. Light is the single most important source of energy and heat on earth. Without light, life would be impossible on earth. Light is necessary for life, which is why it was the starting point of creation. With the creation of light, time began to be marked by this cycle of light and darkness, day and night, and this has characterized the earth ever since. When God saw the light, he saw that it was what? Good. And the first day came to an end. Days 2 and 3, picking up with verse 6. And God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it, according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. Now listen, one of the things I want you to notice during this day is that, during the first 3 days, is that God basically caused 3 separations as he's creating and forming the earth for us. On day 1, God separated this in your outline. God separated the light from the darkness. He separated the day from the night. On day 2, God created the sky by separating the waters in the heavens above from the waters on the earth below. In so doing, he created an atmosphere. He was creating a place where we could actually breathe and where we could move about. On day 3, the waters on the earth were collected into seas, and thus dry ground appeared. It was separated from the water, giving man a place to plant his feet. And so these 3 separations show how God began to create a beautiful and perfect environment for us to live in. And man, I want you to think about this. Just consider our atmosphere. The composition of our air is 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. If you alter that just slightly, life on earth would cease to exist. That's how fine-tuned our planet is. Psalm 33, verse 6, 7, and 9 state, "By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. He gathers the waters of the sea into jars. He puts the deep into storehouses. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm." And so at the end of day 3, God had not only produced dry land, vast oceans, and a perfect atmosphere, but God brought forth, in your outline, vegetation and fruit-bearing trees, each with the capability to reproduce according to its kind. In fact, one of the amazing ways that we see a proof of a creative mind is the way that seeds are carried from place to place. Some seeds are light and feathery, they can just float through the air. Other seeds are carried by animals and birds by adhering to animal fur, or by being eaten and later deposited in animals' droppings. And so if you look at everything in creation, you begin to see this incredible creative mind behind every single aspect of creation. And what God was doing was He was creating a perfect environment for us to live in, because He wanted to bless us. And that's still what He wants to do. Days 4 and 5, verse 14. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. It's amazing that that's all it says, is that He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 4th day. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living and moving thing with which the water teems, according to their kinds, and every winged bird, according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the 5th day. Now listen, science struggles to explain the vastness of the universe, with all of its galaxies and the billions upon billions of stars. Do y'all know how many galaxies there are? I don't think anybody really does, but they've estimated that there are about 170 billion galaxies in the observable universe. How they can determine that, I have no idea. Did y'all know that a dwarf galaxy has about 10 million stars in it, and a super galaxy has about 100 trillion stars in it? Do you know what 170 billion is times 100 trillion? I have no idea. But explain this. How can somebody believe that all of this came about because of evolution? It just blows the mind. I want y'all to consider the amazing design of our world. Did you know that our planet, if the Earth were either 10% larger or 10% smaller, life would cease to exist? Furthermore, Earth is just the right distance from the Sun, allowing for just the right amount of heat and light. If we were any closer to the Sun, we would all burn up. If we were any further away, we would freeze. Consider the amazing fact that the Earth tilts on its axis at 23 degrees. No other planet is tilted like this. This angle provides that the Earth is slowly turned in all parts of its surface before the rays of the Sun. If there were no tilt to the axis, the poles would accumulate enormous masses of ice, and the center part of the Earth would become intensely hot, and life would cease to exist. Consider the moon. Without the moon, we'd all die. Did you know that? It's responsible for cleaning the oceans and shores of all the continents. Without the tides, all of our harbors and shores would become one big stench pool of garbage. But because of the tides, continuous waves break upon the shores, aerating the oceans and providing oxygen to plankton, which is the very foundation of the food chain in the world. Without the plankton, there would not be oxygen, and life would cease to exist. The ozone blocks powerful killer rays from reaching us, but allows just enough through to kill algae. 8 killer rays fall upon this earth continually from the sun. Without the ozone, we would all be burned, blinded, and broiled in just a day or two, and life would cease to exist. So the question is, how did this amazing universe come into existence? Well, Genesis 1 gives a very simple answer. God made it. He spoke it into existence. And so how can we question God? Think about that. How can we question God? It's really God who should be questioning us. Did you know that God does question us? In Job chapter 38, verses 3 and 4, it's like God has put us up on a stage and He's questioning us. And here's what He says. Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundation? Tell me if you understand. Did you see those idiots on that video trying to explain how we were created? That's the best they can come up with. And listen, they've been teaching that in high schools for years. And I used to believe it. When you consider the earth in comparison to the universe, think about it. It's nothing more than a tiny little microscopic dot. And then how about you? When a 747 flies over the earth, you're what? A tiny little dot. And so we're all a bunch of tiny little dots. And we're trying to tell the crew of the universe how we got here. And we think we've got it all figured out. On November 5th, 1981, when speaking at the American Museum of Natural History, Dr. Colin Patterson, senior paleontologist for the British Museum of Natural History and one of the world's leading evolutionists and regarded as the world's foremost fossil scientist, said this: the explanation value of the evolutionary hypothesis of common origin is nil. If you don't understand that sentence, let me explain it to you. It means that we've gained nothing from evolution. It teaches us nothing. He went on, evolution not only conveys no knowledge, it seems to convey anti-knowledge. How could I work on evolution 10 years and learn nothing from it? Most of you, now he's talking to a room full of scientists, most of you in this room will have to admit that in the last 10 years we have seen that the level of knowledge about evolution is remarkably shallow. We know it all not to be taught in high school, and that's all we know about it. And so on this fourth day in your outline, God created the sun and the moon and the stars to help us mark time, to give us a compass to follow when men set out to explore. When Christopher Columbus left Spain, did you know he was a believer? And God put on his heart that there was some more land out there. And so he set sail. And what was he following? He was his sextant. He was following the stars that God put in heaven to guide him. The sun provides us with heat and light, and the moon and the stars provide just the right amount of light at night so that we don't walk around in total darkness. How did it all come to be? To observe the incredible and complex design of the universe, and then to say it all happened by chance would be like someone believing that a bomb went off in a trash can and a Rolex watch popped out. On the fifth day, God filled the skies with birds and the waters with fish. What is amazing about the life of the fish and the birds is this: they are self-sustaining. That is, they have their own means of getting nourishment and breathing and defending themselves. They are self-repairing. If injured, they have means to heal. And they're self-reproducing with built-in means by which they propagate, each according to their what? Own kind. This phrase, each according to its own kind, underscores the very truth that evolution denies. That when living creatures reproduce, they reproduce only creatures similar to themselves. Apes do not give birth to humans, in case you haven't figured that out. I was just reminded, where's Mark Helms? Raise your hand, Mark. Right back there. Mark went on a trip, and I'm going to have him come up here sometime this year and tell you about his trip. But he had a horrible, he was in Kenya on a mission trip, and they were in a wreck, and he cut his arm about 8 or 10 inches, basically from the elbow to his wrist, about 2 inches wide all the way down to the bone. 4 inches of bone exposed. And Rob Jones, is Rob here? Rob's not here. Rob was with him, thank goodness. Rob saved his arm. I'm sorry I'm telling you a story. But here's what's so amazing. I'm not going to tell you more. He said with God's help, Rob saved his arm. That arm is totally healed. Now, how does that happen? Is that just an evolutionary process? No, God created our bodies so that they're self-healing. You cut yourself and your body just supernaturally heals itself. I think it's just evidence that God exists. By the way, men, God put those fish up in the ocean for 2 reasons. One, to eat them. And second, to enjoy them. And so I know some of you men love to go out to the Gulf Stream and try to hook up with a big blue marlin. And some of you guys, like myself, I don't like to go out quite that far, because every time I go up there, I'm just worn out when I get back. I like to go maybe to Cape Lookout and try to catch some puppy drum. Or with Tommy, we do this kind of sissy thing. We like to collect shells, but that's another story. I hate to say this, but my boys and I, we go out to this place called Shark Island, which is Lee Holder here. Where's Lee? Lee didn't want me to tell about Shark Island, so I'm like, look, Shark Island is off the coast of New York somewhere. Anyway, we go out there. My boys are trying to catch puppy drum. I'm walking around looking for shells. They say, what is wrong with our dad? Anyway, where was I going with that? Anyway, so guys, when you go out there and you're fishing, I want you to remember this. God put those fish out there for our enjoyment. He loves fishermen. Remember, Jesus called a bunch of fishermen to come and follow him. And the next spring morning when you wake up and your window's open and you hear those birds singing to God, you remember that God put them there for our enjoyment. You see, everything that God created, he created for you and me because he loves us. God saw that it was what? Good. Day 6. And God said that the land produced living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its what? How many times does he have to? Do you think he's trying to make a point? And it was so. God made the wild animals, each according to their what? Kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. By the way, I believe the reason why it says there was morning, there was evening, this morning the next day, there was evening, this morning the next day. What's he trying to tell us? He did it over 7 days. I'm sorry I believe that. I believed it when I was 10. I still believe it. Nobody can prove it otherwise. So I'm going with the book. You decide what book you're going with. And when I stand before God, you know what I think he's going to say? You were right. And I'm going to say, you were right. All right, then God said, let us make man in our what? And so notice it says, let us. Right here we're given a little hint that God has this plurality about him. Elohim, by the way, is a plural ending. God is one God who exists in 3 persons beyond human understanding. Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Breath of life in it. I give every green plant for food. And it was so. So I want to ask him, what about the barbecue? But I'll get that later. And God saw all that he had made, and it was what? Very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. And so as you can see, God has provided everything that we need for life. And everything that he created was for us, for our use, to make our life better. Have you ever considered the cow? Think about the cow. Did you know we use nearly every part of the cow? One average cow produces more than 5,000 quarts of milk a year. They provide us with ribeyes, T-bones, sirloins, and fillets. Even the cow's bones and hoofs can be bored to extract collagen for making gelatin. And the hide makes durable leather. It's so obvious that God made the cow why? For our benefit, for our use. How about a horse? The horse was perfectly designed so that a man's legs and butt fit while riding his back. And how about a dog? Why did God give us dogs? You can kick a dog and he'll lick you in the face. Do you know how you can tell who loves you more between your wife and your dog? Have I told this too many times? You want to hear it one more time? Yeah. You take your wife and your dog, but you may have never heard this joke, and you go lock them up in the trunk of your car. And you come back in an hour and you see which one's glad to see you. Did y'all hear the one about the bank robber? I always tell these two together. This is a true story. Happened at the 5 Points last year. This guy comes into the Wachovia Bank there, and there's a line in front of the teller. He goes up and breaks the line, and he pulls his gun out and says, "Give me all the cash you've got." And so the teller gives him all the cash. And he turns around to the guy that's standing in line behind him and says, "Did you see what I just did?" The guy said, "Yes." Shot him dead. Turn to the second guy. "Did you see what I did?" He said, "Yeah, sure did." Shot him dead. Turn to the third guy. "Did you see what I did?" The guy said, "No, but my wife did." has nothing to do with this sermon. All right. So, what does it mean that God created us in His image? He gave us what? A sense of what? Humor. I'm serious. The Bible, God laughs. He gave us a sense of humor. What it means is that, in essence, that we were created according to in a pattern that's similar to Him. We have some aspects about us, some characteristics that are just like God. In your outline, we have moral similarities. We were all born with an inner sense of right and wrong, and when our behavior is holy and righteous, we're like God. Spiritual similarities. We all have a spirit. Unfortunately, since the fall, we were born with a dead spirit. And this is why the new birth is so important. When you're born again, then God gives you, first He comes in and dwells you, and then you have this relationship with Him. And you can relate to God through your spirit, and His Spirit's in you. No animal can do that. That's what separates us from the animal kingdom, which is why we didn't evolve from animals. Mental similarities. We have the ability to reason and think logically. We have the gift of language and thus the ability to communicate both with others and with God. We have an awareness of the distant future. We are creative and we have emotions. Relational similarities. God has personality and He's sociable. In fact, He has fellowship within the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So we are relational with others, and particularly in marriage. Physical similarities. Well, the Bible tells us that God is spirit. However, like God, we can see, speak, touch, smell, and taste, and thus we can enjoy His creation as He does, even though He does so in a far greater sense. And so even though God does not have a body, our physical bodies reflect certain aspects of God. And so understand then that we were created in the image of God. And then think about this. When God sent His Son to the world, He came in the image of who? In the image of man. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up right here in 60 seconds. We were created in the image of God. But what we're going to see in the next two chapters is that we sinned, and that marred our image in us. It marred God's image in us. And the world was created perfect. But when we sinned, God cursed the earth, and He cursed us. And so the earth is marred, and we're marred. But God is not finished. The reason Jesus came into the world was to redeem us and to redeem the world. And so one day, the Lord is going to come back. He's going to make everything like brand new. And in that moment, when we see Him, we will be like who? We will be like Him. And so listen, the moment that a man is born again, God's Spirit comes and takes up residence within us. And then God begins to work in us to improve our image so that we begin to look more and more like Him. And then 1 John 3:2 says that when we see Him, we shall be like Him. And then we have this great hope of this coming new world, that God is literally going to bring us back to the Garden of Eden. Look at Revelation chapter 22. There's the garden in Revelation 22. There's the tree of life. There's the river. And so we're headed back to the beginning. Do you see that? And then God's not going to lose. He's going to win. His will is going to be accomplished on earth as it is in heaven. He's going to restore this earth, and then all of those who place their trust in Him will live with Him forever. And you know what He's going to do? He's going to tell all His children the same thing He told Adam and Eve: have dominion over the earth. And so for eternity, forever, ever how long that's forever, we will have dominion over the restored earth, and we will live the way God originally intended for us to live. Do you want to be part of that? Do you have that hope tonight? The only way that you can have that hope is if you're in Christ and He's in you. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your word. I thank you for these men. I just pray to God that you would put a hedge of protection around each one of them and around